Story 1. I'm a paramedic working the graveyard shift. One night I got called for a situation with unknown police on the way. There was a lady around 40 and she just arrived in the country. She was lying on the couch, eyes wide open, pupils fully dilated. There is almost no white in her eye. She's breathing normally, but she's not moving. At one point she screamed and her body jerked in a way that no living thing should move. A friend of hers was with her and she was the one who called 911. Trying to figure out what happened to the girl and asking the basic medical question, her friend told me that she had been exorcised twice in Colombia before. At that point, I was scared a little. Since she is not responding at all, we bring her to the hospital. All of her muscles were so hard that when we decided to take her to our stretcher, we were able to carry her like a plank on the stairs. She also tried to scratch my face with her nails, and once every 5 to 10 minutes screamed like something I had never seen before. She went to a psych ward after. Never heard from her again. 15 years later, I'm still wondering if it was a real demoniac possession or just a psych condition. Story 2. Working alone. I was cleaning carpets at a restaurant at night. One second I was cleaning, the next things go black, and then I'm staring at a puddle of blood on the ground and just on my hands and knees looking at the blood. I was confused and immediately forgot about the blackout and just assumed I'd had a bloody nose. As a carpet cleaner, I just turned my machine on and cleaned it up. I went back to cleaning until about 30 minutes in when I got this sense of dread, like I knew I was going to die. I just knew it, and the thing a lot of people don't think about with carpet cleaning is that your hoses are connected to the van, which means you have to leave a door open the entire time. Not only that, but you clean from the furthest point with your back to that open door. I was positive someone was going to come in and kill me. I finished my job fast enough that the business canceled our contract because I did a terrible job that night. I finished up and had to exit out of a door on the opposite side of the restaurant from my van and then circle back around to it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn a lock. I got in my van and took off like a bat out of hell, and then realized almost immediately upon getting on the freeway that someone may have gotten into the back of my van while I was locking up the building. Actually, no, I knew they had. They must have. They were watching me and hopped in while I was locking up the restaurant. Also, for reference, there's a huge-ass vacuum machine that blocks you from seeing most of the back of the van while driving, and they were hiding behind that. I was positive someone was back there, and I couldn't even look in the rearview mirror the 30-minute drive back to drop off the van at my work because I knew I'd see something. Maybe it wasn't even human, the thing. I didn't know. I jumped in my car, and once I was on the road home, I finally felt okay because I had a full view of the back seat the entire time. I got home and realized my hair was super crusty. I figured I must have been sweating from the fear and went to wash just my head in the shower. I just wanted to put on a funny show and decompress, so I wasn't going to do a full shower. Blood. Just blood everywhere. In the tub, down my face, splashed onto the wall. Just a river of blood coming off of my head. The rest of the night was a blur, and it took me 2 entire days to realize that I'd gotten a concussion that night and drove for almost an hour in 2 different vehicles immediately afterward. I now think of that night as the most terrifying night of my life, and honestly, for some reason, I'm tearing up right now typing this out. There's one thing that will stick with me forever, though. I mostly assume I slipped and hit my head on a nearby counter. That makes sense. Their tile slope beside the carpet can get pretty slick, and I woke up beside where I remember there being a pretty sharp-looking corner. But about 10 minutes before I blacked out, I could have sworn I heard a voice. I could have sworn I heard someone say, distantly, just barely over the sound of my loud-ass vacuum, "Hey, there's someone in there!" I just assumed I was hearing things, but I guess I'll never know. Story 3. I worked at a movie theater when I was 17 and had a couple of things happen that were corroborated years later by current employees. After the last showing of the night, my manager would lock the doors, and the rest of the crew would do a final, sweep prepares cleanup of the theater and bathrooms. On more than one occasion, with 3 of my female co-workers, heard the sound of a child laughing in the ladies' room. Every time it happened, the manager would have to check the bathroom, but no one was ever in there. One of those women quit after it happened to her a second time. Another time, a customer came running toward the concession stand from one of the theaters at the end of the hall, screaming. To this day, it's as scary as I've ever seen anyone. She kept saying, "It's bleeding! It's bleeding!" over and over. Once we calmed her down enough to get a full sentence out of her, she said there was an arm hanging out of the wall of the theater she was in, and it was dripping blood. Naturally, my boss called the police, and they investigated it. There was no arm hanging out of the wall, but one of the officers did find a square hole in the concrete behind the padded wall. It was deep enough to reach his arm into it, up to his shoulder. The only thing that I was part of that still creeps me out was the man in the projection room. We used the emergency door in one of the theaters to take the trash out because the dumpster was just outside it. When you brought the rolly bins back in, you could see up into the projection room. Well, on more than one occasion, a few of the guys would see a man standing in the window of the projection room looking down at us. He was wearing a brimmed hat, similar to what you see in old detective movies. A trilby, I think it's called. So you couldn't quite see all of his faces. One night I was bringing the bins back in, and the man was looking down at me, and I saw the glare of his red eyes. Sort of like the eye shine of a cat. When I told my manager, he turned white as a sheet and asked me not to talk about it or tell anyone. I quit the next day. Since then, I've been to that movie theater a few times and spoken to employees about whether they've seen anything strange, and enough of them have, at least for me to believe something is going on there. Story 4, I used to work the night shift at a grocery store in my small town in North Dakota, and we usually closed at 10 p.m., but sometimes people would come in last minute. It was annoying, but the store director didn't want us to tell customers to leave. But before we locked up, I usually did a walkthrough of the store to make sure no one was in it so we could pull the registers. This one incident seriously crept me and another courtesy out. So I was doing my usual walk around. Before closing, we had skeleton crew that night, and I see this priest, really tall guy, bald. I walked past him and said, "Hi," he smiled. I walked all the way back around, and the other courtesy tells me he saw the priest too. And the cashier asked me if it's okay to pull the drawer, and I say there's one more person in the store. I tell her it's a priest. She says he never came. I thought maybe she wasn't paying attention to the doors and didn't see him. So we wait for him to check out, and the manger asks if anyone is in the store. It's been around like 10 men since I checked, so I go around again and I can't find him. So I go again because I thought I might have missed him, and I still can't find him. So I check the bathrooms, and Ziggy, the other courtesy, goes around with me, and we check the employee bathrooms. He looked pretty old, so he might have gotten lost. We even the back storeroom, and we can't find him. I'm pretty convinced I saw a ghost or something that night, because the other bagger was up front, and I'm pretty sure the cashier would have remembered checking out a priest. He was pretty spooked too. I'm pretty sure the cashier and my manager didn't believe us. What do you guys think it was? Story 5. Late, so no one will likely see this, but I work night security at a museum. I was usually second shift, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., but I often covered the graveyard shift for some co-workers to get extra money. One night, I'm working a double, 3 p.m. to 7 a.m., and for the second shift, I work all alone. My partner leaves at 11 p.m., and I say goodbye as I'm making coffee. All is quiet and everything is normal. I'm drinking coffee, listening to a podcast, and flipping through Reddit when I see the motion sensors start going off. So I turn on the lights and look at the cameras. The way the motion sensor worked was it told us where the motion was in the building. So I started to follow the motion sensor in conjunction with the cameras. But as the motion is moving, there isn't a damn thing on the cameras. So I started to get worried. I start gathering a flashlight, which doubles as a nightstick, a phone just in case I need to call the authorities, and my cup of coffee. As I gather all of it, something starts banging against the bay door that connects the loading dock, where the security office was, to the rest of the museum. It was like someone threw a hammer at it, but nothing on the playback of the camera. So I went up to the area where the motion sensors were going off, and there wasn't anything, except for the smell. There was a smell of burning hair. It was everywhere I went. So I started worrying about a potential fire. But our fire systems used to get triggered by dust, so they were really sensitive. So I was a little concerned that the system wasn't going off. Then all the hair on my back started standing on end, but nothing was around me. It was freaky, so I ran back to the office and decided to not do the rest of my tours that night, keep the lights on, and monitor the cameras until the next shift took over. Story 6, I worked the closing shift at a pizza place one night. My friend, we'll call him Jake, was in the office counting up the money from the day, and I was out in the lobby turning everything off. As I was walking towards the back to help Jake, I swear to God, I saw someone standing in our arcade room staring right at me. I was freaked out as we had been closed for 20 minutes and the front door was locked, so there was no way anyone could have gotten in. As I went to go talk to the person to ask them to leave, Jake came running to the front and he quickly pulled me into the back office. I told him the situation and he told me to look at the cameras. Nothing. No one had been in that room for at least half an hour. He then went on to explain the story of what happened there. About 5 years before that night, a mentally ill man had gone off his meds and ended up shooting himself inside that room. A lot of weird shit happens on the night shift, such as things moving on their own or people hearing their name being called when no one is around. I hadn't experienced any of that until that night. Then afterward, even on the day shift, I'd sometimes hear my name being called. Story 7, I worked as a weekend camp counselor at a camp for people with developmental disabilities. To give a little more context, I'm female, and there were so few male counselors that a few of us had to sleep in the same rooms as the guys. The camp was for anyone ages 11 to 99, but this weekend I think the ages were about 12 to 55. These things happened all on my very first night. I was one of the counselors in the guys' room. One of the guys seemed to like me throughout our daytime activities, and as soon as the lights were off at bedtime, he moved to the empty bed next to mine, about 5 feet away, and started to jerk off. I was so shocked I had no idea what to do. I just lay there frozen. When he finished, he got up to clean himself. He turned the bathroom lights on, which woke up anyone who was near, including this one teenager. That teenager immediately booked it outside, which set off the alarms in the whole building, which woke everyone up. The protocol is that most counselors had to go find the person, so we had to shove shoes on and try to find him in the pitch black woods. After about 5 minutes, one of the counselors found him, and we all settled back into our beds. Because of all that, one particular kid had way too much sensory overload, and possibly he was tired. So he screamed at the top of his lungs for about 10 minutes until sometimes could find a way to calm himself. After that, everyone calmed down and fell asleep, except me. As exhausted as I was after all that, I lay awake thinking, WTH did I get myself into? Story 8. I used to work the night shift at a middle school. Every night while cleaning out the boys' locker room, I would hear at least one locker slam shut, sometimes more. This creeped me out when I started, but after a couple of months, I got used to it. One night while cleaning one of the girls' locker rooms, I heard a girl scream. I walked out of the locker room and even looked outside the building, didn't see anybody. Before that, I worked at the high school, and I'd randomly hear doors open and close. Nowadays, I work the day shift at another school. About a year ago, I just got to the building to begin my shift. It was still dark out, and I was turning on all the lights. When I walked by the main office, I heard what sounded like someone ransacking the place. Papers were being tossed. I heard what sounded like a table or file cabinet being dragged. I remember my first thought was, man, somebody must have lost something important. Then I clicked. It was 6 in the morning, and it was either Thanksgiving or Christmas break, meaning there was no school and there shouldn't be anybody in there. Took me a second to work up the courage to go in and check it out. When I did, nobody was there and nothing was out of place. Finally, last month, I got a call from dispatch at 3 a.m. The fire alarm was going off, and they needed somebody to go turn it off. As soon as I walk in, I freak out. The alarm is blaring, but what scared me was the strobe light that flashes with the alarm. The building was pitch black except every other second when that strobe lit the halls up. It looked like something straight out of a horror movie where they're looking for the killer. I was half expecting to see someone pop up out of nowhere when the halls lit up. Story 9. Used to work nights at a Home Depot. There was one time where for a week or so, our store stayed open 24 hours. For the most part, this wasn't really a problem. Typically, nobody comes shopping for home improvement items at 2 in the morning, except that one couple that came looking for marble countertops at 1:30 in the morning, and the woman was wearing a nice dress. I guess there was also that one young lady who came looking for a toilet paper roll holder a little after midnight. I had just gotten off my first break, and she was wearing jorts and one of those white with black belt stereotypical karate outfits. She was oddly specific about which roll holder to get too. But the real story lies within the insulation. It was nearing 3 in the morning, and I and another guy were stocking insulation, as well as fixing the bays and some such maintenance. A bunch of big R30s had fallen in their bay, and while I was sorting through them, a fucking hand came out of the mess and grabbed my arm. I lost my mind enough for not only the guy I was working with to freak out, but also for my boss, who was across the store, to come check out the commotion. Turns out a homeless drunkard had come into the store at some point, and I can only assume before the night crew showed up, and had made a nest in the insulation where he fell asleep. The dude was in bad shape too, was far gone into whatever inebriation that we had to call the police to remove him. I was always a little more cautious around the insulation after that, for at least the time the store stayed open, 24 hours. Story 10. We have had people slit their wrists in the bathroom, OD in the bathroom, have sex on the floor of the bathroom. One of the managers was attacked by a shoplifter with a hatchet. Another got maced in his face. His beard saved him from most of it. Lovely bunch. The scariest thing that I have heard was one Christmas Day when the store was closed. The alarm went off. A manager lived down the street, so he had to be the one to go check it out. He came in, shut off the alarm, and then checked for any signs that someone had broken in. Nothing. He hears a child's laugh. Now he was alone in the store. No one else was with him. He looks for the kid, but can't find anything. Hears the laugh a few more times, then goes to check the cameras. Nothing. He locked up and refused to go back into the store alone. The only creepy thing I have personally experienced was being on a register, away from almost everyone else. I would constantly feel like someone was behind me. It would creep me out in the middle of the night. Years later, I hear someone talking about things falling off the shelves for no reason in a particular spot. We had a remodel, and the spot was where that register had been. I avoid that area at night now. Story 11. I worked the third shift as an RN on an orthopedic floor. Never failed. Every full moon, crazy things happen. One night we each had 11 patients and 3 nurses. No CNA. It started with the man who was on oxygen, constantly trying to smoke in his room despite hearing the dangers and warnings. Before I could contact the shift manager, I heard a noise I can't describe. One of my co-workers' patients with a rectal tube in had slid out of his special air mattress onto the floor with the rectal tube out. As she and I are trying to get him back in bed, the phone is ringing. Get him in bed with the help of strong security guards. Answer the phone, and one of my patients kept calling 911. She was receiving too much pain medication. When I walked in to check on her, she had climbed post-op 2 knee replacements over the side rail and was all tangled up. That wasn't even the whole shift. A gunshot victim with an angry family around past visiting hours got yanked by one patient's family member into a room and shoved towards a guy who they say is going to vomit. Of course, before I could grab a bucket, it went all over me. Many mornings I went home with vomit, urine had a full urinal thrown at me, or worse, somewhere on my person. Always disrobed on the mud porch and immediately showered every morning. Between all of those calamities, there were strokes, codes, and DNR patients who passed away even on orthopedic. There is a lot entailed in preparing the deceased patient for the family to say final goodbyes, then much more after the family's departure. Not sure why this particular memory is so prevalent in my mind, as there were much worse incidents that happened. Story 12. I used to work in a pub which closed at 11 p.m. After stopping serving the customers, we had to clean for a day, so it was 11:20 to 11:30 when I was free to go home. The pub was located in London's Fitzrovia, and I lived in proximity to the Tower Bridge area. Most of the time, I just took a walk back home, which usually took me about an hour. My way home was usually along Fleet Street and Cannon Street. The latter runs basically through the city. It is extremely busy during the day, but dead quiet at night. No nightclubs, cinemas, or other venues of this type, and most pubs around were closing at 11, so by midnight, you were able to meet their only night buses, literally no pedestrians. I like these walks. They helped me to clear my mind and get some fresh air after the thick atmosphere of the noisy and smoke-filled pub. Throughout a couple of months of my work, I had two encounters that creeped me out a bit. Right in front of Cannon Street Station, there was a middle-aged, smartly dressed gentleman standing next to a phone booth and trying to do something with his mobile phone. When I approached him, he in a very polite manner asked me whether I by chance had a spare 50 pence, because his mobile phone doesn't work and he would like to make a phone call. He looked sober, behaved reasonably, and seemed to have been one of the city executives who stayed in the office a bit too long. Nothing seemed off about him, so I decided to give him what he requested. He thanked me jovially, and I proceeded to walk home. A couple of days later in the same spot, round the same time, the same man when I approached him asked me the same question. This time I freaked out, replied that I had no chance on myself, and almost ran away from this place. To this day, I have no idea who the man was and why he kept standing in a desolate place asking for money. I mean, in both cases, he might have genuinely had some sort of problem with his mobile phone, but what are the odds? As I walk along a street between Monument Station and the Tower of London, I see a car whose driver seems to be lost or to be looking for something. They turn into a side street, then come back, reverse, and finally approach the only person in the vicinity, me. The window rolls down and I see a woman in her late 30s, early 40s. She calls me and asks if there is a petrol station nearby. I tell her. Then before she drives away, she asks me if I can spare her some money because her mobile phone doesn't work and she has forgotten her purse. She looks sober and is polite, but this part about forgetting money just doesn't stick. When she was driving away, I took a glimpse at her car's registration plates and made a note on a piece of paper. And again, a week or so later, on the same street, at approximately the same time, as I walk home, a car pulls over next to me. The window rolls down and a female driver asks me for some money as she is short of petrol and doesn't have her purse on her. It kicks me as a quirky deja vu, and I take a look at that lady in her vehicle. The thing is, at this moment, I cannot recall the face of that lady from a week before. Also, I realize I didn't remember the make or color of that car. But when she drives away, I take a look at her registration plate and frantically start looking for the piece of paper I put down a week earlier. I find this note, take a look, and yep, the same car and almost surely the same driver. What this type of lady was doing in the middle of the night driving through an almost empty part of the city, asking random people for money. Now, after years, I start to accept a theory that it was a kind of glitch in the Matrix thing. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.